Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog. Today we start with a quick trip back in history to England, World War II, Winston Churchill at the moment when it looked like the tide in the war was turning towards a definite victory of the Allies. At that time, Winston Churchill, looking forward, said, "It's not the beginning of the end, but it is the end of the beginning." The reason I mention that quote is because I think, well, the deep state, the attacks on Donald Trump, the Russian collusion hoax, all of it, we can't say it's the beginning of the end, but I think we can start to say, I'm hoping we can say that it's the end of the beginning. We're starting to see some of these people in the deep state, the Clappers, the Brennans, the Comeys, the McCabes, the Strucks, the Pages, the list goes on, finally starting to be held accountable. How accountable remains to be seen, but I just want to do a quick update, and then I want to make an interesting point at the end, or I think it's interesting to me, and I don't think anybody's mentioned it yet. I haven't heard it. That's one of the reasons, as I've said in the past, that I do these videos, is I like to point out things that other people have missed or haven't bothered to point out. So we go to the Justice Department. We start right here. This is the most recent. Justice Department IG, that's the Inspector General, referred James Comey for criminal prosecution. I'm especially overjoyed at this because of, well, it's true of he and all of his colleagues in the deep state. Their arrogance, that's what really bothered me. Almost as much as what they actually did is their arrogance, their contempt for the senators that questioned them, for instance, their sanctimoniousness, their apparent belief that they're above the law, that they can't be touched, that nothing is going to happen to them. And who knows, in the end they may turn out to have been right. As I said, it's not the beginning of the end, it's only the end of the beginning. But it's good news to know that he's going to be prosecuted. Justice Department Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz said Wednesday that he referred former FBI Director James B. Comey for criminal prosecution this year after concluding he leaked sensitive materials to a friend. I'm not going to go into the particulars of the case. I just want to mention that it's finally happening. And this is only the most recent instance because, as we know, Justice Department authorized prosecutors to charge Andrew McCabe. That's two. It was one. Now it's two. I'm hoping these cases will go forward, and even if they're found innocent, and we have to presume for now that they're not guilty, right? But I hope they're put through the ringer like, well, for instance, Michael Flynn, the way Michael Flynn was put through the ringer, the expense he had, finally ended up having to plea bargain, partly because of the high legal fees he was having to pay to defend himself, but also because, you may recall, Mueller was going to go after his son, not Mueller's son, Flynn's son. It's clear to me that Flynn was pressured into confessing to a crime that was only, as they say, a process crime, a situation that would not have arisen but for the Mueller investigation, which we now know was investigation of a hoax, of a Russian collusion crime that did not exist. So this brings us to Michael Flynn. I just mentioned him, and we are going to get very quickly today to my point today. Flynn lawyer accuses prosecutors of, quote, egregious conduct, unquote, hiding exculpatory evidence. Now, what does this mean? That's in a follow-up story. Let me put this other headline up and then I'll link it all together. Sidney Powell is Flynn's new lawyer, not the legal team that was defending him in his earlier cases. And by the way, if you think lawyers are expensive, Lord knows how much does a whole legal team cost. I hope none of you, and certainly that I never have to find this out. I read these stories about these people that are charged with crimes literally running up millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars in legal fees. I have no idea how they eventually pay these lawyers. It's a mystery to me. Again, I hope I never have to find out. Anyways, getting to Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell's latest motion in Michael Flynn's case is a Russiagate bombshell. Now here I'm going to have to read a few quotes for you, and then we'll get into the point that I want to make, that I'm building up to. On Wednesday, the previously sealed motion to compel filed against federal prosecutors in the Michael Flynn case was made public with only minor redactions. Before I go too much farther, let me just explain those two things in that sentence that may not have been clear. The motion to compel is a motion to compel the people who prosecuted, I would say persecuted, but we'll just say prosecuted Michael Flynn to produce certain evidence. Now, this is based on a precedent of a case called the Brady case, Brady versus Maryland. I won't go into a lot of detail. I'm linking to the Wikipedia article so you can look it up and get the details. But basically, it's a Supreme Court case. A person was convicted of a crime. It later turned out that the prosecution had in its possession certain evidence that, it's called exculpatory evidence, evidence that favored the defendant and would have helped the defendant's case, and perhaps would have resulted in a different verdict or avoided a plea, if we're talking about a plea, to avoid the expense of a court case. That's what this is about. Sidney Powell is saying that the prosecutors of Michael Flynn did exactly the same thing, that they withheld evidence that the Supreme Court said that they could not withhold. So now that you have that background, let me just go back to the quotes here, and then hopefully it'll be more understandable. On Wednesday, the previously sealed motion to compel filed against federal prosecutors in the Michael Flynn case was made public with only minor redactions. Just the day before, during a hearing before federal judge Emmett Sullivan, Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell, had highlighted some of the evidence prosecutors withheld from her defense team. Yesterday's filing expanded exponentially on the areas of evidence Powell seeks and lays bare Powell's bigger plan moving forward to expose the breadth and depth of Spygate and how flaying Flynn lay at the heart of the soft coup attempt. So you can see what we're building towards here. In her motion to compel, Powell cataloged 40 categories of evidence the government has refused to turn over. She seeks a court order requiring federal prosecutors to provide the withheld evidence under Brady. That's this Brady v. Maryland case that I just mentioned, and its progeny, cases that resulted after the Brady case. Brady and its offshoots require prosecutors to disclose material exculpatory and impeachment evidence to the defense team. And, this is important coming up here, as Judge Sullivan made clear during Tuesday's hearing, that duty exists even though Flynn had already pleaded guilty and even though he had agreed that the government would not be required to provide him with future evidence. In other words, even though the prosecutors were successful in forcing Flynn basically to submit, even though the case is theoretically over, sentencing tentatively scheduled for, I believe, December 18th. Despite all of that, that doesn't quash the request that Powell is making here. And there is a possibility that the case could be reversed and the charges dismissed, so on and so forth. The prosecution, I believe, had actually argued that point, but the judge says it doesn't matter that he already admitted guilt. None of that matters if the prosecution withheld evidence. And as this article makes clear, this lawyer, she is, number one, very smart, but number two, she apparently has some contacts in the Justice Department, because the question is how she even knows how some of these 40 pieces of exculpatory evidence that she's seeking, how she knows they even exist. But she does. And the prosecution is challenging Powell's assertions and saying that the evidence is not exculpatory. I won't go into all the details. They're just, obviously, they're contesting Powell's claim. So Powell is going to have an opportunity to reply to the prosecution's charges. Powell will have a chance in her reply brief to detail how each piece of evidence sought is either exculpatory or serves as impeachment evidence. Here there's an interesting twist. Powell seems poised to also argue that the 40 pieces of evidence requested are exculpatory and thus Brady material because, and this is the important part, because they will show that, quote, the entire prosecution should be dismissed for egregious government misconduct and long-time suppression of Brady material, unquote. What Powell wants to do is to, number one, exonerate Flynn, but also accuse the prosecution of misconduct. But there's something more. I don't believe it's in this article, so you'll have to trust me on this, but another attorney writing made a very important point that there have been cases, and this could be something else that she's trying to do with these 40 document requests. There have been cases where discovery has been granted. In other words, where a defense has been granted by a judge the right to look at everything that the prosecution has. Now, sometimes what the prosecution has, some of it's embarrassing. Some of it shows, well, as she's saying here, Powell, that it shows egregious misconduct on the part of the prosecution, and they don't want that to come out. They don't want their own department embarrassed, regardless of how the case eventually would get decided. So there are times when a prosecution, when they realize that something is going to have to come out, be made public, that they don't want to come out to be made public, then the prosecution will just drop the case and just ask the judge to dismiss the case, because they would rather let that defendant off the hook than have to have all this information revealed. An obvious case, it has happened where some of the information is confidential, where it could hurt the United States, where that would have to be revealed in order to be fair to the defendant, but it's going to do more damage to the country than whatever benefit could be derived from convicting the defendant. So they let it go. But in this case, there are situations where there's no national security issue. It's just that somebody or some department is going to be embarrassed. And that is what it looks like might happen here. Anyways, that seems to be Powell's strategy, to have the whole thing thrown out one way or the other, and Flynn is exonerated. Which now brings me to the point I want to make. Would it not be a very delicious irony if it turns out that Flynn gets off while Comey and McCabe and who knows how many others are convicted? To me, I think that would be fantastic. The hunter becomes the hunted, and the hunted has a victory. The hunted is exonerated. The hunted has a tremendous victory celebration and a congratulatory tweet from Donald Trump, and the hunters are nailed to the wall, have their hides nailed to the wall. That would be just wonderful to me. So I'm just going to end on that happy note, or that possibly happy note, because as I said, it's not the beginning of the end, but I'm very hopeful that it's the end of the beginning, and that at the end of the day, justice will be done. And that's it for today. Thanks for stopping by. As always, glad you could stop by. Thumbs up if you like the video. Share it with anybody you think would benefit from the video. Any comments, agree or disagree, put them in the comments section. Hey, if you got a Twitter account, then you can tweet out this URL, share it with all your followers. Maybe they would retweet. Who knows? And you could subscribe. That would be fantastic. You can also, I understand there's something you can click to get an alert to know when I post a video, though I do try to post them Monday through Friday. So, and usually around 8:30 in the morning. So they're there all day, and then they're there forever after that. I don't take them down. So you could just check whenever, check every day. Maybe I'll miss a day. And you don't have to check on the weekends, Saturday or Sunday, because I don't post on those days. I guess I've meandered long enough. Again, thanks for stopping by. I look forward to seeing all of you again very soon. And until I do, bye.